Blood stained the marble floor of the Rossi estate, pooling around the boots of the most feared man in the city. Everyone said the Alpha King would tear me apart before sunrise. They were wrong. Within 24 hours, the monster everyone dreaded was entirely on his knees for me. Rain battered the tinted windows of my father's Mercedes, the rhythmic drumming a hollow soundtrack to my execution. The city blurred past a smear of neon and despair as we drove deeper into the territory controlled by the Rossi Syndicate. In our world, biology was destiny. Society was cleanly, brutally divided by the ancient genetic markers of alpha, beta, and omega. Modernity had dressed it up in tailored suits and corporate boardrooms, but beneath the veneer of civilization, the primal laws of the pack still ruled absolute. And in this sprawling concrete jungle, the Rossi family was the apex predator. Sitting across from me was Nathaniel Pierce, the man who had sired me, yet who looked at me with nothing but thinly veiled disgust. My family, the Pierces, had once been a respectable upper-tier pack in the financial sector, but Nathaniel's greed had led him to gamble with money that belonged to the underworld. He had borrowed heavily from Dante Rossi, a man whispered about in terrified, hushed tones. Dante was the Alpha King. He had seized control of his empire by allegedly slaughtering the treacherous elders of his own syndicate. He was known to be ruthless, unstable, and violently intolerant of failure. When the debt came due, Nathaniel didn't have the funds, so he offered a trade. He offered his flesh and blood. He offered me. "Stop trembling, Rowan," Nathaniel snapped, adjusting his silk tie, refusing to meet my eyes. "You are finally making yourself useful to this family. You should be grateful." Grateful. The word felt like ash in my mouth. I was a 22-year-old Omega, but in the eyes of my family, I was defective merchandise. A childhood illness had severely damaged my scent glands. In a society where an Omega's worth was judged by the sweetness and potency of their pheromones, their ability to soothe and submit to powerful alphas, I was functionally invisible. My scent was faint, broken, often described as the smell of cold static electricity rather than the intoxicating florals expected of my kind. I was weak. I was sickly. I was the runt of the Pierce litter. That was exactly why Nathaniel chose me. He couldn't bear to part with my older brother, a prime Omega, destined for a highly profitable political marriage. So I was dressed in a simple white linen shirt and dark trousers, practically gift-wrapped for a monster. They say he hasn't slept in weeks. Nathaniel continued, his voice tight with anxiety, though clearly not for my well-being. They say he's slipping into a permanent frenzy, a feral alpha. If you survive the night, you stay there. If you don't, well, the debt is settled regardless. The car jerked to a halt. We had arrived. The Rossi estate was less a mansion and more a fortress. High stone walls topped with wrought iron and security cameras loomed in the darkness. Men in heavy tactical gear, smelling of sharp, aggressive beta and alpha pheromones, surrounded the vehicle before the engine even cut off. The door was wrenched open, and the cold, biting wind howled into the pristine interior of the car. "Out!" barked a massive, scarred alpha. His name tag read Dominic. His scent was overwhelming, like burning rubber and stale whiskey designed to force weaker dynamics into submission. I stumbled out into the freezing rain. Nathaniel didn't even step out of the car. He simply rolled down his window, handed a leather-bound folder of transfer papers to Dominic, and gave me one final cold look. "Goodbye, Rowan." The window rolled up, and the Mercedes sped away, leaving me standing alone in the pouring rain, the ultimate sacrificial lamb. "Move, little Omega." Dominic sneered, grabbing my arm with bruising force. He didn't even bother to mask his contempt. To him, I didn't even smell like a real Omega. I was just a fragile toy tossed into the lion's den. They marched me through the sprawling courtyards and into the echoing cavernous halls of the main house. The opulence was suffocating. Chandeliers cast sharp, glittering light over priceless art and imported marble, but the air was entirely poisoned by the suffocating aura of fear. The estate servants, mostly betas, kept their eyes glued to the floor, terrified of drawing attention. As we descended into the restricted wing of the mansion, the air grew incredibly heavy. A physical weight pressed down on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. It was an alpha's territorial dominance, radiating so powerfully that it practically warped the oxygen in the corridor. It smelled of dark rain ozone and copper, the smell of fresh blood. Dominic stopped in front of heavy reinforced oak doors. He looked nervous, his own dominant alpha nature instinctively shrinking back from whatever was on the other side of that wood. "The boss is in a bad mood," Dominic muttered, unlocking the heavy deadbolts. He tore apart the last 3 Omegas they sent to calm him down. They barely made it to the hospital. "You don't smell like much, kid. Maybe he won't even notice you before he snaps your neck." With a harsh shove, Dominic pushed me into the pitch-black room and slammed the door shut behind me. The heavy locks clicked into place. There was no escape. I stood frozen in the dark, the scent of ozone and copper flooding my senses, thick enough to choke on. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing, and then from the shadows a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the floorboards. My eyes desperately struggled to adjust to the gloom. The room was massive, but it looked as though a bomb had detonated inside it. Expensive antique furniture was reduced to splintered kindling. Heavy velvet curtains hung in shreds from the massive windows, letting in only thin, jagged slices of moonlight. And the smell, it was a chaotic storm of pheromones. An alpha in a state of frenzy is a tragedy of biology. When an incredibly dominant alpha is denied a proper outlet, or when the stress of their environment pushes their cortisol levels beyond a critical threshold, their higher reasoning shuts down. They become trapped in a loop of primal aggression, driven by a desperate, agonizing need to conquer, destroy, or claim. "Who's there?" A voice rasped from the darkest corner of the room. It wasn't a human voice. It was a rough, fractured sound, vibrating with lethal intent. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Rowan. Rowan Pierce. A massive figure detached itself from the shadows. Dante Rossi, the Alpha King. Even in the dim light, his presence was terrifying. He was towering, broad-shouldered, and completely disheveled. His white dress shirt was torn, stained with what looked like dried blood, whether his own or someone else's I couldn't tell. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat. But it was his eyes that froze the blood in my veins. They were wide, dilated, completely consumed by the feral madness of the frenzy. He moved with terrifying speed. Before I could even gasp, he crossed the room and slammed me against the heavy oak doors. A massive hand wrapped around my throat, not entirely crushing my windpipe, but applying enough pressure to let me know my life was entirely in his grasp. "Pierce!" Dante hissed, leaning in close. His breath was hot against my skin. The pure, unfiltered blast of his alpha pheromones hit me like a freight train. Any normal Omega would have instantly collapsed. A healthy Omega's biology is hardwired to respond to an alpha's aggression with immediate, desperate submission. Their scent glands would burst open, flooding the air with cloying, sweet pheromones, begging for mercy, their bodies going entirely limp. But I was defective. My broken scent glands didn't flood the room with sweetness. My body, accustomed to fighting through chronic illness and the daily rejection of my own pack, didn't shut down. Instead of collapsing, I forced my eyes open and stared directly into the terrifying face of the Alpha King. "You don't smell right," Dante growled, his grip tightening fractionally. Confusion rippled through his frenzied haze. He leaned his face into my neck, right over my dormant glands, inhaling deeply. "You smell empty, broken, and you smell like you're dying from the inside out." I choked out my voice, barely a whisper, but steady. Dante froze. The absolute sheer audacity of my words seemed to short-circuit his primal rage for a fraction of a second. No one spoke to him like that. No one defied him. "They sent me as a sacrifice, Dante." I continued fighting for every breath, refusing to break eye contact. "My father owes you millions. He sent a broken Omega because he thought you'd kill me, and the debt would be wiped clean." Dante's eyes narrowed, the feral darkness flickering as a sliver of human intellect fought through the haze. "Then why aren't you begging for your life? Little Omega, because I realized something they didn't," I said slowly, carefully raising my trembling hands. I didn't push him away. Instead, I laid my cold palms flat against his burning, feverish chest. "You aren't killing people because you're cruel. You're attacking them because their fear is amplifying your frenzy. Normal Omegas flood the air with panic and submission. It feeds the monster in your head. It overstimulates you." Dante's breathing was harsh and ragged. His hand remained around my throat, but the pressure wasn't increasing. He was listening. "My scent glands are ruined," I murmured softly, my thumbs gently stroking the rigid, tense muscles of his chest. "I have no panic pheromones to trigger your aggression. I have no sweet submission to make you feel like a conqueror. I am nothing. I am a void." Slowly, incredibly slowly, I projected the only scent I could manage, that faint, static smell of cold rain. It wasn't much, but in the overwhelming, chaotic noise of Dante's sensory overload, it was a sudden drop of pure, silent water in a raging desert storm. "It's quiet," Dante whispered, his voice cracking. The murderous intent in his eyes wavered, replaced suddenly by profound, agonizing exhaustion. The monster was receding, revealing the broken man underneath. "It is," I agreed softly. "If you kill me, Dante, they will just send another terrified, sweet-smelling Omega tomorrow, and the noise will start all over again. The frenzy will consume you, and your rivals will take your throne." I took a massive, calculated risk. I stepped forward, closing the final inch of space between us, slipping my arms cautiously around his waist. I offered him no resistance, no fear, and no submission. Just presence. Just silence. "Let me stay," I whispered into his chest. "Let me be your silence. I give you 24 hours. If you aren't in control of your own mind by tomorrow night, you can finish the job." Dante stood rigid for what felt like an eternity. The Alpha King, a man who commanded an empire of blood and shadow, was trembling. Then slowly the hand at my throat loosened, slid down to my shoulder, and gripped my linen shirt like a drowning man holding onto a lifeline. He collapsed forward, burying his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling my faint, broken scent as if it were the only oxygen left in the world. The clock had started. I had 24 hours to tame a king, or I would die trying. Moonlight sliced through the shredded velvet curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the cold, ruined bedroom. For the first 5 hours of my promised 24, neither of us moved from that spot on the floor. The Alpha King, a man who had reportedly brought the city's underground stock markets to their knees and casually dismantled rival syndicates over breakfast, was entirely unconscious, his heavy head resting against my collarbone. His breathing was a ragged, wet sound, a stark contrast to the terrifying growls that had echoed through the halls just hours before. Holding him, I realized the sheer physical toll the frenzy had taken on his body. Dante's skin was radiating a sickly heat, his muscles twitching with residual adrenaline. As an Omega, even a defective one, my deepest instincts whispered to me, urging me to build a nest, to soothe the injured Alpha. But I couldn't rely on biology. I had to rely on my mind. My family might have considered me useless, but while my brother was groomed for high society galas and photographed for vanity profiles, I had spent my life reading, observing and analyzing the brutal financial and political currents that governed our world. I knew that Nathaniel's massive debts weren't just vague gambling losses. They were complex leveraged disasters involving frozen assets at J.P. Morgan Private Banking and emergency liquidations handled through Sotheby's. The Rossi Syndicate operated like a Fortune 500 company with a body count, and Dante Rossi was its ruthless CEO. A man like that didn't just spontaneously lose his mind without a catalyst. Slowly, agonizingly, I managed to drag Dante toward the only piece of furniture in the room that hadn't been completely reduced to splinters, a massive custom-built king-size bed. It took every ounce of my meager strength to heave his dead weight onto the mattress. I found a heavy, dark cashmere blanket, half buried under a smashed lamp, and pulled it over him. His scent, previously a suffocating storm of ozone and copper, was beginning to dial back into something deeply earthy, petrichor and cedar, the smell of a forest after a violent storm. It was intoxicating, but I pushed the distraction aside. I needed to understand why the apex predator of the city had been locked in a room to lose his mind. Wandering through the wreckage of his opulent prison, I began to piece together the clues. The heavy oak doors were locked from the outside. The reinforced windows were sealed shut. This wasn't a sanctuary. It was a quarantine cell. I moved toward a massive mahogany desk that had been overturned. Beneath it lay a crystal decanter, remarkably unbroken, filled with amber liquid. A heavy crystal tumbler lay a few feet away, a few drops of the liquid pooling on the carpet. I knelt and picked up the tumbler, bringing it cautiously to my nose. The sharp, peaty bite of what smelled like an incredibly expensive Macallan 25 hit me first, but underneath it was something else, a synthetic, cloying sweetness. My heart hammered against my ribs. Because my own scent glands were practically dormant, my olfactory senses were hypersensitive to foreign pheromones. I recognized this smell. During my endless doctor visits, attempting to cure my defect, I had been exposed to various hormone treatments. This smell was unmistakable. It was a concentrated synthetic replicate of distress pheromones. Specifically, the terrified, agonizing scent of an Omega in deep physical pain. To a normal Alpha, smelling this in trace amounts would trigger protective instincts. But if Dante had been unknowingly consuming this day after day, locked in a stressful environment, the synthetic distress signals would violently clash with his inability to find and protect the source. It would artificially drive his cortisol levels through the roof. It would forcibly induce a permanent, maddening frenzy. He wasn't naturally losing his mind. He was being chemically poisoned. "What are you doing?" A raspy, gravelly voice broke the silence. I spun around. Dante was awake. His dark eyes were no longer dilated with feral madness, though they were bloodshot and exhausted. He pushed himself up on one elbow, the heavy blanket pooling around his waist, exposing a chest crisscrossed with silver scars and the fresh, dark bruises of his recent rampages. The sheer, overwhelming gravity of his Alpha presence filled the room not with violence this time, but with absolute, crushing authority. "You're awake," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I didn't submit. I didn't lower my gaze. I stood up, holding the crystal tumbler. "And you have a rat in your syndicate, Mr. Rossi." Dante's jaw tightened. "Explain yourself, Omega. And quickly. My head feels like it's been split open with an axe." "Your frenzy," I said, walking slowly toward the bed. "The reason you tore apart the last 3 Omegas they sent you, the reason you haven't slept, it wasn't because of the stress of the syndicate. It's this." I held up the glass. "Someone has been lacing your scotch with synthetic Omega distress pheromones, high-grade black market chemical triggers. They were deliberately driving you insane." Dante stared at the glass, then up at my face. The dangerous intellect that had allowed him to slaughter his way to the throne was rapidly rebooting. "Who brought the decanter into this room?" he asked, his voice dropping to a lethally quiet register. "I don't know who handles your personal quarters," I replied, sitting cautiously on the edge of the mattress. "But I know who threw me in here tonight. Dominic. He expected you to kill me. He told me you'd snap my neck before you even noticed me. If I died, your frenzy would escalate. The council would deem you officially rabid and under syndicate law. The underboss assumes the throne." Dante finished the sentence, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. A dark, terrifying smile curved on his lips. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was a promise of absolute carnage. "Dominic. He controls the outer perimeter. He handles all my meals and drinks during a lockdown. He thought my father was just sending a weak sacrifice to wipe a debt," I said softly, the cold reality of my family's betrayal still stinging but overshadowed by the adrenaline of the moment. "He didn't realize my defective glands meant your frenzy wouldn't be fed. He didn't realize I'd be able to smell the poison." Dante shifted, closing the distance between us on the mattress. His large, calloused hand reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair away from my forehead. The touch was startlingly gentle, a stark contrast to the man who had tried to choke the life out of me hours prior. "You are a very dangerous little creature, Rowan Pierce," Dante murmured, his thumb trailing down my jawline. "They sent a lamb to the slaughter, and the lamb figured out how to defang the wolf. How much time do we have left on your 24-hour clock?" I glanced at the heavy grandfather clock in the corner of the room, its glass shattered, but the hands still ticking. 4 hours until morning. 4 hours until Dominic opens those doors expecting to drag out my corpse and declare you unfit to rule. Then we have 4 hours. The Alpha King whispered, his eyes flashing with a predatory lucid brilliance, to plan a proper welcome. The remaining hours evaporated in a blur of hushed strategizing in the dark. Dante was still physically weak from the chemical withdrawal, but his mind was a steel trap. We didn't act like an Alpha and an Omega. We acted like generals drawing battle lines. I walked him through the exact financial structures Nathaniel had leveraged with his syndicate, mapping out how Dominic was likely using the Carlyle Group's shadow accounts to launder the skimmed profits meant for the Rossi empire. Dante listened, his respect for me visibly growing with every analytical breakdown I provided. I wasn't just a calming void anymore. I was his ultimate tactical advantage. By the time the grey, dismal light of morning began to filter through the torn curtains, the trap was perfectly set. Dante instructed me to lie on the floor near the door, positioned exactly where a discarded body would be violently thrown. He then retreated to the darkest corner of the room, masking his breathing, pulling his alpha pheromones back into himself with terrifying discipline. It was a skill only the most elite alphas possessed the ability to completely suppress their presence, becoming a ghost in the room. At exactly 8 a.m., the heavy metal deadbolts began to slide back. The sound echoed like gunshots in the silent room. The heavy oak doors creaked open. Dominic stepped inside, flanked by two heavily armed betas. The thick, aggressive scent of his burning rubber and whiskey pheromones flooded the doorway, confident and arrogant. "Check the corners," Dominic ordered gruffly, stepping carefully over a piece of shattered mahogany. His eyes landed on me, lying motionless on the floor. A cruel, satisfied smirk crossed his face. "Well, looks like Pierce's kid didn't last the night. Shame. Bag him up. I'm calling the council. The king is too far gone. He's officially a rabid liability." "Is that your medical diagnosis, Dominic?" The voice drifted from the shadows, smooth, cold, and dripping with venom. Dominic froze, the color instantly draining from his face. The two beta guards instinctively reached for their weapons, but a sudden suffocating wave of pure, unadulterated alpha dominance slammed into the room. It wasn't the chaotic wild storm of a frenzy. It was a perfectly targeted surgical strike of territorial power. It hit the betas so hard they dropped their rifles and fell to their knees, gasping for air. Dominic stumbled backward, clutching his throat, his own alpha presence entirely crushed beneath the sheer weight of Dante's aura. Dante stepped out of the shadows. He had put on a fresh black tailored shirt we found in the ruins of his closet. His hair was slicked back. The feral beast was dead. The undisputed king of the Rossi Syndicate had returned. "Boss." Dominic choked out, his eyes wide with genuine terror. You're lucid. You thought the synthetic pheromones in the McCullen would finish the job," Dante said smoothly, walking slowly toward his treacherous underboss. He didn't yell. He didn't raise his voice. That made it infinitely more terrifying. "You thought you could poison my mind, use my own biology against me, and step over my rotting corpse to take the throne. No, I swear," Dominic pleaded, backing away until his spine hit the heavy oak door. "You underestimated me," Dante whispered, stopping just inches from Dominic's face. "But more importantly, you underestimated him." Dante gestured gracefully towards me. I stood up, brushing the dust from my linen trousers, my posture perfectly straight. I didn't smell like a victim. I smelled like cold, clear static the eye of the hurricane. "Rowan Pierce." Dante announced, his voice echoing in the grand, ruined chamber, "was sent here as a sacrifice. Instead, he diagnosed your treason, dismantled your financial laundering scheme through the Carlyle accounts, and gave me back my mind. He accomplished in 24 hours what my entire security detail failed to do in a month." Dominic stared at me, pure hatred and disbelief warring in his eyes. "He's a defective Omega. He's nothing." With lightning speed, Dante's hand lashed out, wrapping around Dominic's throat and lifting the massive man an inch off the floor. The sickening sound of restricted airflow filled the room. "He is my consort." Dante snarled, the final remnants of his primal nature bleeding into his words. "And you are a corpse." Dante didn't even look as he casually tossed Dominic to the heavy-set betas, who were just managing to regain their feet. "Take him to the soundproof interrogation rooms in the sub-basement. Don't kill him yet. I want to know exactly who supplied the synthetic chemicals before you dismantle him piece by piece." The guards, terrified and eager to prove their loyalty to the recovered king, dragged the thrashing, gagging Dominic out of the room, slamming the door shut behind them. Suddenly the room was quiet again. Dante turned to me. The suffocating alpha aura completely vanished, replaced by the earthy, grounding scent of petrichor and cedar. He walked over to me, his dark eyes entirely focused on mine. "The 24 hours are up," Dante said softly, reaching out to gently cup my cheek. "And you're still in control of your mind," I replied, a small, genuine smile touching my lips for the first time since my father dragged me into his Mercedes. "Your father's debt to my syndicate is officially erased," Dante stated, his thumb lightly caressing the sensitive skin over my dormant scent glands. But you aren't going back to him. You aren't going back to a family that saw you as defective merchandise. Where am I going? I asked, though my heart already knew the answer. Dante leaned in his lips, brushing against my ear, sending a shiver of electricity down my spine. You're staying right here, Rowan. You tamed the monster in the dark. Now it's time you helped me rule the Empire in the light. I closed my eyes, leaning into the warmth of the Alpha King. They had sacrificed the weakest Omega to a bloodthirsty monster, hoping I would disappear. Instead, I found my crown. Did Rowan make the right choice by staying with the Alpha King, or should he have taken his freedom and run? The underground world of the Rossi Syndicate is full of secrets, and their story is just beginning. If you want to see what happens when the defective Omega takes control of the most ruthless mafia empire in the city, hit that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for Part 5. Drop a comment below with your favorite plot twist.